Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Live from Toronto, this is IFA's Global Café. My name is Bruna Swerts. I'm Director of Communications and Strategy, and it's my pleasure to have you all here today. We have a lovely discussion coming up, combating ageism through education and intergenerational activities with Mrs. Amber Colibaba. Just a few guidelines in terms of housekeeping rules. Please be mindful that this session is being recorded. We're streaming it live through our Facebook channel. We will be posting resources and additional information on the chat. Please use this function for posing your questions. You will be called upon or either have your question read by our moderator. This is Anna Sangster, and the floor is yours, Anna.
Thanks so much, Bruna. Well, to reiterate, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks everyone for taking the time to join us for this week's Global Cafe. As Bruna said, my name is Anna Sangster, and I have the distinct pleasure today of being your moderator and in being in conversation with Miss Amber Colibaba. Amber is joining us today from Trent, the Trent Center for Aging and Society, where she coordinates the Rural Aging Research Program at Trent University in Peterborough, Ontario. In 2018, she graduated with a collaborative specialization in aging studies from the Master of Arts in Sustainability Studies program at Trent. Amber's research focuses on rural aging and community development, including volunteerism and rural age-friendly program implementation and sustainability. In collaboration with Dr. Elizabeth Russell, Amber has recently been focused on a pedagogical approach to tackling ageism, which gathers faculty, staff, students, sorry, I had to pop up there, and community stakeholders to build meaningful dialogue that challenges entrenched ideas about aging, old age, and older people, and seeks to celebrate aging, understand the diverse experiences of aging, and challenge ageist practices in communities and culture. This educational approach to combating ageism will be the topic of today's discussion, and one I'm very much looking forward to hearing and learning more about. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning, Amber. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much for that lovely introduction. I feel like now I don't even have to do a presentation. You just said it all. So thank you so much again, and thank you so much for having me and letting me speak about this really great research and really timely and important topic of ageism and how we kind of combat that globally. As Anna mentioned, I'm the coordinator of the Trent Center for Aging and Society, as well as our Rural Aging Research Program at Trent University, which is located in Peterborough, Ontario, in Canada. And before I get started, it's important for me to just acknowledge some of our other collaborators. So the lead of the Rural Aging Research Program, Dr. Mark Skinner, and Dr. Elizabeth Russell, who's the lead on the research that I'll be discussing today, as well as our collaborator on the Pedagogy of Aging project, Dr. Eric Theriault in Cape Breton University in Sydney, Nova Scotia, which is just in Atlantic, Canada. So when we think about ageism and we talk about ageism, what we're referring to are stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination directed toward people based on any age. But for the sake of today and the themes of the IFA and our research, I'm going to focus specifically on ageism that is directed towards older adults. And another really important caveat here is that I talk about this through a very Western perspective. So acknowledging that the relationship between different generations, younger and older, varies across geographical location and different cultures. But from today, I'm going to speak from a Western, North American, very Canadian perspective. So globally, 1 in 2 people are ageist against older people. And that's an astounding number and statistic. Every other person it has stereotypes or prejudice against older people. And while everyone, no matter what their age, perpetuates ageist behaviors and attitudes, it generally stems from younger individuals or youths, viewing older people as incredibly different as themselves, whether mentally or physically, associating traits such as illness, ugliness, mental decline, uselessness, and poverty with older adults. This kind of doom and gloom narrative when they think and associate things with older people. Part of it is caused, we're finding in research, by their own anxieties and fears about their own aging futures. And I'll talk about maybe where these kind of come from as well. But, they fear getting older and they have anxiety about what aging might look like for them. Therefore, they are giving them these traits and kind of having these negative connotations about what that means. It can also be caused by youth-focused media. So think about the way that we see older adults portrayed in television shows or movies, for example. Sometimes it is this, dependent, immobile older adult. And that's what, youth and media is a whole other beast I'm not going to tackle today, obviously, but having, seeing that and having that kind of portrayed really brings those stereotypes into the focus of youth in today's society. Literature shows that in Western culture, media and literature negatively portrays older adults, and often women in particular, describing aging bodies, for example, as repulsive. Think of those, anti-aging campaigns for skincare where the goal is not to look old. This kind of repulsive, we don't even want to look old. So women's bodies as repulsive, older minds as deteriorating, and older wisdom as irrelevant. So for many, contact with grandparents can help to reduce ageism in youth. But there's a caveat here. It's contact with grandparents that are in good health. So whether that's an individual who has a grandparent that, is in a pickleball league, or goes for bikes, or perhaps continues to work, and is, a happy and positive kind of successful older adult in terms of aging. So contact with those types of grandparents can help to reduce ageism in youth. However, research shows that contact with more dependent older adults can actually perpetuate ageism in younger generations. So while contact with older adults, you might think the more contact you have, the more stereotypes and ageist kind of attitudes one might have. However, it's dependent upon the condition or that particular older adult. So if someone has a grandparent, for example, that might be in a long-term care setting, that actually might be doing the opposite of what we're thinking, and it might actually perpetuate ageism in youth. That's not to say you shouldn't have contact with your grandparent if they're in long-term care, but what we're seeing is that it just depends on the types of interactions that they are having that can really kind of sway the spectrum of ageist behaviors in youth. The Global Report on Ageism, which was published by the World Health Organization in March 2021, outlines a framework for action to reduce ageism worldwide. So a number of strategies were presented in this great report on how we can reduce ageism. I'm going to talk specifically about two. The first one are educational interventions, and how we can do things and implement things and programs and kind of activities across all levels of education to increase empathy towards older adults and to dispel misconceptions about age groups. So types of things we can insert in educational perspectives to learn and to teach about older adults, for example, and how we can learn about what it means to be older and what it means to be aging. So that way we can have an informed understanding of what it means, rather than making all these assumptions about, you become, negative as you get older, these kind of negative connotations. So, and really starting that from a really young age and continuing on into post-secondary education, which is the focus of our research, which I'll get into in a little bit. The second one is intergenerational interventions, and this is fostering interactions between people of different generations. Think of daycares that are in long-term care settings, or daycares that go to long-term care settings. These interactions between younger and older generations, as I mentioned, sometimes it can perpetuate ageism, but getting those interactions and at least seeing firsthand older adults, because there are benefits to both. And I'll explain that again in a little bit, of the benefits for younger generations to learn and to see and to interact with older adults, but then there's also positives to the older adult as well. So having those kind of mutually beneficial intergenerational interventions can really help us to reduce ageism and to really get some really great interactions between age groups globally. So the focus of our research, which I mentioned was led by Dr. Elizabeth Russell, looks specifically at these two interventions, and also something we're doing at the Trent Center for Aging and Society speaks to kind of these interventions as well. But as I mentioned, specifically in a post-secondary institution, so at Trent University in Peterborough, Ontario, and Cape Breton University in Nova Scotia, Ontario. So literature reveals that exposure to a gerontology curriculum can improve post-secondary students' understandings of older adults and the aging process. Service learning interventions in post-secondary institutions are reportedly the most effective to reduce ageism. And what we mean by service learning is when there's direct interaction with students and community members. So an intergenerational perspective, it seeks to co-create meaningful relationships and educational products between younger and older generations through things like placements, co-op opportunities, group activities, group projects, where we're really having students and older adults come together in a post-secondary classroom or outside like a co-op. So if you're a nursing student and need to do a co-op, service learning could be going and, having those types of interactions. So more formal or informal. However, for those of you who are joining us today that work in a college or university or post-secondary institution, you can probably understand, service learning can be logistically quite challenging to implement in the classroom. Timing and energy for the instructor to build out this form of capacity to really create these interactions, and whether it's at the instructor level or whether it's at the department level or what have you, those can be really logistically challenging, especially in a time of limited term faculty appointments. So it might be me teaching a course for the very first time. I'm just on a contract. I might not be teaching it next year. Am I going to actually put the time and effort into making this kind of intergenerational classroom if it's just a one-off course? So it is really quite challenging to implement service learning. So with this in mind, we wanted to see what the impact of courses on aging for university students were without a service learning component. So we conducted a study between 2019 and 2020 on the impact of standard lecture-based undergraduate psychology of aging courses. So Dr. Russell and Dr. Terrio are both faculty in the Department of Psychology at their respective universities, and they both taught essentially the same course. It was the Psychology of Aging or Older Adult Development course for about third-year undergraduate students. And we really wanted to know how that course and more traditional undergraduate courses, so lectures, exams, seminars, reading, student projects, how that influenced and impact those students' attitudes towards older adults and the aging process. So in 2 different semesters in 2019 and 2020, and unfortunately we were stalled a little bit by the pandemic in 2020. I think our interviews started the week that they pushed everybody online. So we had to pivot, as I think we've all become experts in the recent years. It's pivoting. So students participated in interviews and focus groups. So focus groups when we were in person, and then on the phone interviews when we were at home. And it's important to note that students were completely recruited, and all data collection was done by myself as a research assistant to ensure anonymity for the course instructors. So we wanted to make sure that students didn't feel pressured by their instructors to participate at all. We also didn't want their responses to be, tailored to, well, I want to make sure my instructor thinks that I'm actually learning course material. So it was all done by me. The instructors still have absolutely no idea what students were a part of it, so completely anonymous. And the instructors were given everything after grades were even submitted. So completely anonymous, just about how we did that to ensure reliability of our findings. So they participated in focus groups and interviews to reflect on the course material and how it impacted their experience and relationships with older adults, their own aging process, and aging in their life. So how they saw their parents aging or their grandparents aging, or family, friends, and that sort of thing. Key findings revealed that classroom-based, again, that traditional lectures, seminars, exams, readings, that style of course content stimulated a deeper understanding of the aging process, prompting a reduction in and increased awareness of ageism and an enhanced personal connection with aging, ultimately facilitating the development of this idea that we found of an age-conscious student. So that is someone who's aware of the full spectrum of the aging process, is not themselves ageist, is attuned to ageism amongst others, does not on the whole fear their own aging, and relates well to older adults. So when we think about this idea of an age-conscious student and kind of the three points that make up what it means to be an age-conscious student, a deeper understanding of the aging process. So students really described course material as debunking their initial stereotypes of aging and creating a lens of intersectionality through which aging is viewed as impacted by gender, race, sexuality, class, and ability. So students, as I mentioned, similar to what we learned in the research, is that youth, in terms of undergraduate students, really had this doom and gloom narrative. Older adults were poor and older adults were senile and older adults, didn't really do much according to students. So they were incredibly surprised when, the course said, no, you can be you can be happy, you can work, you can volunteer, you can be independent, you can be creative. So it really helped to debunk those initial stereotypes and really kind of shattered their doom and gloom narrative towards aging and older adults, and even their own kind of aging, which I'll explain in a little bit. So in terms of a reduction in and increased awareness of ageisms, students described how course content inspired attitudes and behavior changes amongst themselves who actually admitted to perpetuating ageist attitudes, and described how now they have the tools required to dispel ageist attitudes and behaviors in themselves and their peers. So while a lot of them really did admit to having ageist, and a lot of them, I feel like the key example that they gave was, I always said that older adults were terrible drivers. That always seems to be what they always told me, is that, I'm so ageist, I always think that they're terrible drivers. But now, through course material and through readings and, interacting with Dr. Russell and Dr. Terrio, they felt like now they have the tools to be like, you know what? No, maybe they have, vision impairment, or maybe they're just, maybe there's a reason behind my assumptions about them. But the nice thing is that they said, I'm doing that within myself, but if I'm catching friends or roommates or parents having these ageist attitudes, they're the first one to be like, we don't talk like that. This is how we can think about older adults. So they kind of became these activists in their own kind of personal bubbles with friends and family on dispelling that. So it wasn't just within themselves, it was within others as well, which was nice to hear. And lastly, in terms of increased personal connection with aging, students identified with and related to many of the course topics, seeing connections between the learning material and elements of their own life. So a lot of them related to examples that they learned in the course with their parents or their grandparents. And they also developed an increase in empathy towards older adults. Students also described a better connection with their own aging and aging futures, being less fearful of growing older, describing being more informed about what it means to become older and what it means to age. Again, one of the major things I feel like all of them told me was, one of the questions was, what did you take out? What was the best thing that came out of the course? And they all said, well, now I feel like I have to start saving for my retirement. So if anything, a bunch of RRSPs were opened after that course, to be able to start saving for retirement is what they took, because they wanted to start saving now. They wanted to, not be in, hard times, I guess, when they're older. So they said, I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to start saving now because it's really, opened my eyes to what I need to do to prepare myself to getting older. So what our research shows is that a reduction in ageism in post-secondary students can actually be achieved through course-based contents on aging, where students sit through lecture, reads academic and grade literature, and develop student-led presentations. Now, this isn't to say that intergenerational interactions between younger and older generations isn't important. It is. Rather, our study notes that if service learning is not feasible in certain courses in post-secondary institutions, course content can still have really positive benefits to students. A lot of the literature was very focused on service learning and intergenerational interactions. And we're like, but there has to still be a way that students can take away from this and still be, better citizens in terms of older adults and ageism. And I think our research really showed that in this perspective from Trent and Kate Breton was it can, and that was really nice to see. But in terms of intergenerational interactions, in the form of face-to-face, playing cards and games, gardening, things like home sharing, in addition to intergenerational friendships and familial relationships, it is a very effective strategy for reducing ageism. So I feel like I jump between two sides of the coin of you don't need it, but you do need it. But I'm definitely in the camp of both can work really well together and independently. So it's a very effective tool and has really positive outcomes, as I mentioned before, for both the younger and older individual. So for older individuals, intergenerational contact can improve health and psychosocial well-being, increase self-esteem, reduce stress and loneliness, and provide a greater sense of social connectedness. So the Trent Center for Aging in Society, so Trent University's Interdisciplinary Aging Research Center, which is directed by Elizabeth Russell. So she's a real big advocate for intergenerational and educational interventions to reduce ageism. Back in June, we partnered with Canada Home Share to create an intergenerational housing solution for older adults and post-secondary students in the Peterborough area. For those of you unfamiliar, maybe not from the area, Peterborough is located in the province of Ontario, about an hour and a half northeast of our major metropolitan city of Toronto. And we have a university and a college in Peterborough, so big student population. And there's a lack of housing, right? That's again, another beast I'm not going to tackle today. But there's a lack of housing and affordable housing for lots of individuals, and students can be included in that in my discussion today. So Canada Home Share is working to kind of rectify places to put students, find places to put students, but also to help older individuals in a home sharing intergenerational housing project. So Peterborough is one of 10 cities across Canada hosting a pilot for Canada Home Share to support aging in place for older adults, so trying to keep them in their home for as long as possible, while providing safe and affordable housing solutions to post-secondary students. So in exchange for reduced rent, so they pay anywhere between $400 and $600 a month. And just to explain how much housing is in Peterborough, I think a one-bedroom apartment is around $1,200. So a big discount. So in exchange for that, students provide up to 7 hours of support for the older adults. So that could be through companionship, household tasks, or errands, etc. Peterborough is currently in the matching phase. Canada Home Share is accepting Peterborough-based applicants for both students and older adult home providers. At that point, the lead social worker for Canada Home Share meets with applicants, conducts home visits and inspections, initiates meet and greet interviews with the students and the home providers, with the end result of hopefully making a meaningful and fulfilling match. Trent Center for Aging in Society, we are so excited to partner on this really great opportunity with an organization like Canada Home Share to bring this really great intergenerational opportunity to both older adults and students in our local community. So in addition to home sharing, the Trent Center for Aging in Society is looking to ramp up other kinds of intergenerational experiences on campus. So this past summer, we hosted our first intergenerational coffee hour, where we had an informal session over coffee and treats, where older adults from our community, and then we also invited some graduate students from Trent to meet. We played some icebreaker games, and then we came together to have a meaningful discussion on what intergenerationality means to them and what it could look like in a post-secondary institution. And having these perspectives from both students and older adult proved very useful, as they wanted to get different things out of it, where older adults wanted to learn and they wanted to really get that, educational perspective, where students and a lot of students that have an interest in aging really wanted that service learning component a little bit, where, I'd like for them to come in my class and maybe we can interview them for a class project. And so that sort of, it was interesting to hear what everyone wanted to get out of it in a very different perspective and means. In addition to that, we are working with the Office of the Registrar to streamline the process for local older adults wanting to audit courses at Trent University. So we actually had an email from an individual who was older and wanted to audit a course and was very overwhelmed with the process. So since then, we've been working with the Registrar's Office to really make it more user-friendly. So again, the academic jargon that we all throw around but take for granted, because some people that might not have been in a institution, in a post-secondary institution setting for a while, might have absolutely no idea when we put a course code, you know, the PSYC 5000. To some people, that might mean absolutely nothing, but it's a requirement for the form is that you find the course code. And so we're trying to streamline that process of how we can, you know, make the form more user-friendly, update the website. So Trent actually has they offer discounts to audit courses for older adults. 65 plus get a discount for auditing courses, but no one knows about it. So we're also working to promote that, make it easier for them to fill out the form and ask questions and know where all the kind of key information is, to help bring older adults to campus and to let them audit courses, make it easier for them to audit courses. And, you know, just telling them that this is something that we'd like, you know, to have an intergenerational campus. So Trent University is a designated age-friendly university, and we really want to abide by that and to have an intergenerational and age-friendly university. And this is just kind of one of those steps that we're working on. So I'm going to leave it there. I thank you so much for listening and to my discussion. We're going to open it up for questions, but something I'd also really like to hear is what intergenerational programs, activities, and interactions do the audience, what are you involved in? I think we can really learn a lot from one another of what has worked well and maybe what hasn't worked so well. In bringing different generations together in your organization or your community. I'm really interested in hearing that. So I'll leave it there. Thanks so much. And I look forward to chatting with you in the discussion.
Thanks so much, Amber. What a great presentation. I am always struck when I'm hearing this topic. I did my master's at the University of Toronto in public health, and we did not learn a lick about aging. I remember starting at the IFA and having no knowledge of aging, healthy aging process, what that looked like. So it's really exciting to hear that that's, you know, somewhat delayed from our perspective and my perspective now, but it's nice to hear that we're at least making strides to kind of integrate that within kind of educational curriculums. Mm-hmm. First question we have, it's actually aligned with one of my questions, so I'm going to merge the two from Shmuel, is about how do we kind of encourage governments, state authorities, and for me, educational institutions themselves to kind of support these projects and integrate these and see the value and start putting them on their curriculums or on their political agendas?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Yeah, how do you do that? From our perspective, we haven't got there yet. We're still in the very early stages. And I mean, Dr. Elizabeth Russell is the advocate, and it's more of just, we have to show that it's working from a university perspective. So we're applying for grants and we're, you know, just doing it. We're finding a way to do it. So that way we can, you know, present back on to, you know, our Office of Research and, you know, to show, and it's also the power of things like social media. Like we've been trying to share all these things that we've been doing and, you know, going to conferences. And I think at the end of the day, we can just really talk about what we're doing, like today, right? Like having these really great platforms to talk about really important key issues like ageism and intergenerational activities, and having these kind of platforms to spread the word, maybe get someone thinking at the end of the day, if someone walks out of this going, you know, how can I make my organization or community less ageist, or what can I do? I mean, I've won. I did what I wanted to do, is, you know, because then the ball kind of keeps rolling. So to really show its importance, I mean, just it's boots on the ground. It's you know, getting the grants if you can, or just kind of making it work. And it's unfortunate that it has to be that way, but that's kind of where we're at. And I think all I can really say is in terms of the next steps. I don't actually know what they are, but you know, we're working with the registrar's office, and then from that, you know, maybe we can move up in the university. And the nice thing about Trent is Trent has acknowledged aging as one of their 3 pillars of excellence in teaching and research. So we do have a lot of buy-in from Trent, and we have the age-friendly university designation, which is really fantastic, and we're honored to have that. So there is this kind of buy-in from a Trent perspective to really, support these kind of endeavors. And yeah, I don't know if I answered that particularly, but it's more just like keep at it, having these platforms and getting out and sharing what's happening, and posting things on social media honestly seems to be at the very low level, at least getting the conversation going, and hopefully can get picked up. And if we all kind of rally around this idea of ageism, I think it can hopefully kind of build up and support these really great initiatives happening kind of all over the world, in very different levels of places. So yeah, great question.
Thanks very much, Amber. There's a question here from Dominic Boyd, and it kind of points to some of the things I was seeing in the presentation, and that kind of idea of, potentially, are we shifting ageism to just a different kind of subset of an aging population? So Dominic, would you like to come forward and ask your question?
Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah, we see a lot of positive images of aging in the media and so on, but the emphasis seems to be a lot of it on people who are well, who are really enjoying being old, and I'm one of those, fortunately. But I also am concerned about the sort of divide between those who are doing well, particularly physically and mentally, and those who aren't. And probably a lot of ageism is really about our attitudes towards those who just aren't doing so well, who have a variety of illnesses going on, or who are declining. And so how do we kind of combat that ableism that seems to be part of the issue here?
It's a great question, and really great comments about the divide. I know in Dr. Russell's, in the first lecture of her course, and in a lot of her presentations that she does, her first images are, when you type in older people on Google, it's these white, beautiful teeth, happy, smiling older people, that are in the sun, wearing white linen. It's insane. It's not representational of what aging means to everybody. And it is really interesting, in some of the discussion that I said earlier was, older adults who are healthy and happy, they don't perpetuate ageism, but those that are not do. And there is this line of this divide. I don't know what we do to continue to kind of blur that line. I'm a big advocate for, while research shows, it perpetuates ageism, I think continued contact with something is always going to dispel things. So, maybe we do, for those youth that have, just the example I gave earlier, for those youth that have grandparents in long-term care, continued interaction with them. And again, this is just me, so don't take this for the spoken word or anything, but to have that continual interaction, at some point, don't we think that it's just going to maybe change our views? Maybe a one-off interaction with an older adult who's maybe living in long-term care, or maybe is a little bit more dependent. Maybe those are the ones that perpetuate ageist stereotypes. But if we can continue, I think all interaction can be good interaction in terms of intergenerational. So if we just continue to foster these kind of relationships, maybe it can help us see, not really see that line so much anymore. That's I think my initial thoughts on it, but it's a really great thing to think about, and it's a really great thing that we can at least, in our consciousness, try not to kind of create that line or work to blur it a little bit. Thank you for your question. That was great.
Thanks, Amber. Dovetailing off that a little bit, kind of the staying power of a class, and kind of the need for kind of almost continued exposure and things like that to kind of constantly combat those entrenched ideas. Anita Rivers has a really interesting question. Anita, would you like to come forward and ask your question?
Well, thank you very much. And this is a wonderful conversation. I am a senior citizen. I'm going to be 70 years old in about a week or so. But I have the wonderful opportunity to teach classes with first year students at Fairleigh Dickinson University. And so I'm very interested in the long-term results of your research, Amber, and whether or not you were able to, first and foremost, take an assessment of where your students, what their mindsets were, what were their lived experiences before they engaged in the course. And then, of course, have you been able to reach back to them and find out, let's say, now that it's about 1 or 2 years out, how their perspectives have changed, if they have changed at all, and determine, you know, what else might be needed. And then, of course, reaching back even longer term to find out whether there is any kind of continuum, I think would be important in this. But one of the things I do also want to throw out there in response to what Dominic was saying, I too am a very active senior citizen, and I fully embrace my age despite the discrimination. And I always tell my students, I am not your average grandma, you know, and then we kind of launch it off from there. And I try to be as transparent and as honest and real as I possibly can. So by my example, they're able, I'm hoping, to take away from the semester with me thoughts that, you know, ageism is not as bad as I thought it, you know, would be, or how can I participate in bringing more understanding, because, you know, the reality is that we're all going to get older. Sorry for the long-winded response, but thank you.
Oh, that was so great. Thank you so much, Anita. And your students obviously really benefited from having you as an instructor, and to have that kind of perspective, because it is very different for everybody, and to be really transparent with that could be so beneficial. So that's so great. Your comments about our research, yeah, I completely agree with the longevity of it. And that's something that, while we didn't do in that kind of more like pilot-based study where we just kind of started, we are really we would like to ramp this up and to start doing those sorts of beginning, middle, and end conversations. So yeah, we didn't really know what they're, you know, we kind of asked questions about, you know, what were your attitudes before the course, but it was at the end of the course that we asked those. So it was really hard to really gauge exactly their kind of perspectives and attitudes at the beginning of the course. But something that we did find was a lot of the individuals that we interviewed, especially from a Trent perspective. So we interviewed students from both Cape Breton University and Trent University, just because they were psychology students. I would see them around on campus, you know, and they'd come to Trent Center for Aging and Society events. And so we kind of had at least I had like a thumb on kind of what they were doing afterwards. And a lot of them did say, you know, I'm in my 3rd year and I have to really think about what I'm going to do when I graduate. And now I would really like to find a career working with older adults. And so whether they actually go into whatever field that, you know, so whether they wanted to be a social worker or what have you. But I think that kind of longevity study would prove well, and to see, so from someone who wasn't a student or was a student all that not that long ago, I remember thinking, you know, I'm a student, you know, it's April, exams are done, now everything is out of the brain, right? Like I did it to, you know, I learned, that's great, but once I left, it was like everything, it just, you know, a week later asked me and I wouldn't be able to tell you what I learned, kind of thing. You know, sometimes you have those, you have those courses. So there is the risk that while they participate in the study, and we did do the interviews within the week after courses, the class actually ended, to really get a perspective kind of right after they were students, there absolutely is a risk that if we were to interview them even a few months later, maybe they wouldn't have the same experiences and, those kind of attitude changes. So we're not sure. So while the goal is definitely to ramp up this form of research in a Trent-based study to really maybe have, at the very least, interviews with students right at the beginning of the course, so we can really gauge the perspective of how their attitudes have changed between the beginning of the course and the end of the course, rather than just speaking to them at the end of it. So it's goals for the future for sure. So thanks so much for bringing that up. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Amber, and thanks, Anita. Amber, I had a question a little bit. You mentioned that kind of some of the students coming out were not only kind of combating ageism with themselves, but also calling it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's often kind of not necessarily a translation. I think we can learn, but the kind of the empowerment to actually advocate in a meaningful way is often difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Were there elements of the curriculum that you guys developed that actually tried to foster that specifically, that kind of move it from just kind of theoretical to actually action-oriented advocacy?
Not that I'm aware of. So again, the courses were already created, which was interesting. And so because we did the two universities, they weren't created in the two courses between Trent and CBU were not created for the purpose of the research. They were pre-established courses that both Elizabeth and Eric had been teaching before. So it was this really interesting dynamic on how two courses in two separate universities can still have very similar reactions. So it was really interesting to see that the students at CBU and Trent, and for those of you familiar with Canada, Atlantic Canada and Ontario in more like Eastern Central, they're very different places, and they're very different ways of life, I guess. And so, however, the impact and the results were still the same. And there, Trent, Peterborough and Sydney are both aging populations, so there was a lot of similarities there. The town sizes, so Peterborough and Sydney were similarly, the universities were the kind of the same population and that sort of thing, so there were a lot of similarities, but the culture of each are very different. However, there was a lot of similarities, and so having those two courses that still produced the same results was really, really interesting. And I think one of the great things that came out of the research is that, yeah, these courses weren't intended for these students to leave and be these advocates for ageism, but that's just what it came to be, right? These students started calling their friends out, and they started calling their parents out when their parents made jokes about their grandparents. And so that was a really fun addition that we didn't really expect to see. We thought they were going to show empathy, which they did. And we thought they were going to, we hoped that was sort of going to happen. And then when they said, yeah, my roommates were, said something about an older man at the grocery store. And I said, no, that's probably because he, has vision impairment, or no, that's probably because this. And we were like, yes, we did it.
Thanks, Amber. A few kind of technical questions about the research itself.
Yeah.
One is any of the information about kind of the methods and more specifically the survey that was utilized publicly available? And then kind of dovetailing off of that, would you be able to provide a bit more demographic information about the students? Kind of, was this a course that was advertised? What was the proportion of, did you have all psych students? What kind of department did it fall under? Just kind of a bit more information about the students themselves.
Absolutely. So our paper is published in, I believe, the Canadian Journal of Aging, if I am remembering that correctly. But if you just Google Scholar Elizabeth Russell, man, it's too early to remember the exact title.
We can connect it. We can provide it.
Yes, absolutely. We'll make sure that it is shared. So my apologies for not remembering this, but so yes, and it's there's lots of information there about our methods, but I can go into it a little bit more. So in terms of we conducted interviews and focus groups, and while those particular tools aren't with the paper, they do go into detail on the types of questions we asked about, what's your favorite part of the course? How did it impact your experience with X, Y, and Z, and that, so some of those questions are on there. In terms of the students, so Elizabeth Russell's course was, I believe, a third-year course, and the CBU course was, I think, either a third or a second-year course. They're both in the Department of Psychology, and so I don't know offhand, as I didn't teach the courses, and I'm not based in the Department of Psychology. I don't know if they were mandatory courses or whether they were electives. Each one had around 50 students in each. I mean, 50 showed up every Thursday or something, but about 50 registered. They were the only courses in the psychology department that was focused on aging. So one of the big critiques I hear is that a lot of courses are about adult development, but don't actually go into detail on aging. So both of those instructors put a focus on an adult development course that actually was about older adults. Students were generally either third or fourth year students. Majority of them were psychology students, but some were also, there was a biology student that was taking it, a couple nursing students. So there was kind of a wide range. I would say about 90% of them were psychology students. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there was anything else. All details on the methods is definitely in the paper. But if you have any specific questions, please feel free to send me an email. It's just acolibaba@trentu.ca. If someone wanted, Bruna, if you can put that in the chat, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Amber. A kind of a comment here from Cynthia that I'm actually anxious to hear more about. Cynthia, would you like to come forward and talk a little bit about the Global Age-Friendly University movement?
I was just wondering how familiar you were with it, and it sounds like your university might be on the precipice of moving toward that. But I'm really fascinated, and I think that's what you're doing is just fabulous. But how you permeate the whole university with combating ageism, I think the age-friendly university 10 principles of becoming an age-friendly university could be really useful if you aren't familiar.
Yeah, so I think we got our designation in 2017, maybe 2018.
Okay, great.
It was a few years ago, so we've got it, and it's been so great to have that at Trent. First of all, it's an honor to be able to say that we are an age-friendly university and to be a part of the global collective of age-friendly universities. And it's really helped with our role at Trent. You know, as I mentioned, aging is one of Trent University's pillars of excellence in teaching and learning and teaching and research, and having that age-friendly designation is kind of another thing in our, you know, checklist of, you know, we have the Trent Center for Aging and Society, and we're, you know, we're a collective of aging researchers, and we do a lot in terms of, you know, aging and education. And then we have this stamp, you know, for this age-friendly university. And I think it's really helped add, you know, credibility, maybe for lack of a better word, of the things that we're doing, but to show Trent, to the Trent community, to the Peterborough community, to the national community and the global community, that we really, we're trying to practice what we preach, and we, you know, we're designated. So we're honored. And I think that it's such a great avenue for other institutions and universities to think about. Because again, it's really helped us, you know, be able to do some of the great things that we've been able to do. So if you're unaware, I suggest looking it up and getting and familiarizing yourself with that, and maybe start thinking through whether that works wherever you are. Yeah. So thanks for bringing that up, Cynthia. That was great.
Great. Thank you.
I'll have to look it up myself. I'm quite embedded in the WHO Global Network, but I haven't actually heard of the Global Age-Friendly University movement. So
yeah,
I don't think the two are associated. So I'll have to figure out where the university comes from.
For sure.
I see a really interesting question here from Christine. Christine, would you like to come forward and ask your question?
I was just actually thinking as you were speaking about how there seemed to be quite a strong focus on aging being a unique experience for older adults, when in fact, you know, clearly we're all aging. And I'm thinking that many younger adults would maybe more readily relate to the experiences of aging in older adults because they actually share them. I think that there are many younger adults who have trouble transitioning and aging even from their 20s to their 30s. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so I think that
Absolutely.
there's an opportunity there in your course or in your curriculum to maybe focus more on some of the commonalities of experiences rather than the diverse experiences between the younger and the older.
Absolutely. That's a really great point. And, when we think about aging, our mind goes to the, 65 plus. But, when we think about early childhood development courses, for example, they are aging, by definition, they are getting older. And so there's a big focus on that. And then, childhood aging. And then there's this big focus on older adult aging. But you're right, as someone who recently transitioned into her 30s, that was a big step. And, having that, and I really like your idea, Christine, of drawing some parallels between what it means between getting older in terms of going from 50 to or 54 to 55 and 29 to 30. There might be some parallels that we can kind of all learn from, because you're right, everyone is aging, no matter how old you are. We are all getting older, and really acknowledging that might be an individual experience for someone who's 18, someone who's 4, someone who's 50, and someone who's 85, is really important when we think about this. So I really appreciate your point. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. I also think it will tie into the points raised by, I think it was it Dominic earlier, in terms of ableism, that I think that there are a lot of younger adults who are dealing with various forms of ability. And I think that they would have a tendency to experience many common things as older adults, because they age sometimes quicker, right? Because of their disability. So I think that, it would be good if those elements could be tied in to the experience at the universities. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Christine, and thanks very much, Amber. We're rapidly approaching the hour, so I'll let you kind of gather your thoughts and leave us with some key takeaway message. But in the meantime, I wanted to let everyone know that we're going to be here next week for our Global Cafe. So please make sure you're joining us. I'm sure it's going to be a fantastic discussion next week as well. Today's discussion has been fantastic. It's got all my juices flowing this morning. It's a great way to wake up for me. And really, really thankful to have you here with us today, Amber. So I'll hand things over to you and let you close us out for the morning.
Oh, thank you so much. And thanks again for having me. And I agree. This is a great way. It's very early, or was very early here when we started. So I never thought, I'd wake up and think about ageism so much, but here we are. And I think it's really great to kind of get us flowing and going into this Friday and thinking about these things as we go into the weekend, and maybe have intergenerational interactions, and maybe you're visiting your grandparents or something else. So thanks. I really I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much for the incredible discussion and for bringing these ideas and comments and to the forefront. And I've really benefited hearing from you. And again, just thank you so much. So key takeaways, tackling ageism, as we discussed today, is incredibly complex. And there's not one way we can try to dispel ageist attitudes and prejudices. So while things like intergenerational contact theory demonstrates that limited regular contact between youth and older adults may reduce ageist perspectives, ageism is continuing to be reinforced by youth-focused media and culture. So we really need to think about that, and how we can, work to dispel that. Educational interventions in tandem with intergenerational interventions can help provide students with the tools to acknowledge and dispel ageist attitudes and behaviors in themselves and in their peers. So if I could say anything about, what we're going to take away today, is that continue these conversations about how we can work to dispel ageism for any age, older adults at any age, as we just discussed. Aging is very subjective, and no matter what your age is, you know, we can all really benefit from talking about it and sharing our experiences and sharing our perspectives on things. So, you know, it's take these discussions and these key points with you today, share them, talk to people, you know, think about, you know, things like age-friendly universities, and how we can really continue to move the conversation forward about older adults and ageism, and hopefully we can continue to foster these really great relationships between people, between places and communities, that really, you know, strive to make them a more like inclusive space for older adults. So I'm going to end there, but that's all I have to say about that. Thanks so much. At the end of the day, yeah, just you know, continue to come to these platforms that talk about the impacts of aging and these really, really important topics, because it's when we, you know, the 60 of us that are gathered here today that can, you know, continue these conversations, and we can just continue to learn, I think is at the end of the day, the most important thing. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Amber. And thank you, everyone. I've seen the chat today. It's been really busy. So thanks for sharing your resources and your expertise. Amber, thank you so much for your time this morning. We hope that we can see you all next week, and have a lovely Friday and a lovely weekend, everybody. We'll see you next time.